The Foundation. The last time I was in Philadelphia was sometime in the early 2000s. I convinced my parents to detour into the rainy city while we were on vacation in our RV. My intentions were selfish because I only wanted to visit famous skateboard spots. A DIY skate park called FDR had been there for years and is run by the locals. The infamous Love Park is in the heart of the city and has been a mecca for skateboarders since the 1980s. Now, the entire park has been redesigned and skateboarders took the granite benches to Malmo, Sweden, and reconstructed parts of the original park. I merged onto US 13 after concluding it was the most direct route into Philly. I also discovered that this road was a part of the East Coast Greenway. The East Coast Greenway is an initiative similar to the state bike route system, where nonprofits and local governments connect bicycle routes from Florida to Maine. I was stoked to follow it, since I presumed it was in its infancy as a route. I followed through a sketchy industrial area for at least 10 miles. It had bumpy roads and heavy truck traffic. However, the wide roads offered some kind of shoulder, and I fit in with my highlighter construction vest. Everything else was old and dingy, and the air was filled with a haze. The casinos were about the only nice-looking buildings. A steel bridge that went up 4 or 5 stories caught my eye. It was seemingly a freeway, but continued so far out that it disappeared into the distance like a mirage. After further research, I discovered it crossed the Delaware River into New Jersey. I forgot I had even been riding next to the water. I hadn't seen a bridge that tall since Louisiana, and my interest was sparked. I would continue to see impressive bridges in these old cities built in the industrial age. I have a mild fascination with massively engineered infrastructure. My small town brain was ready to experience the big city. I eventually stopped at a crossroads and had lunch on my mind. Maps said I needed to get on a bike path, and this was an appropriate place to take a break before I ventured into the city. I saw a corner deli that promoted their hoagie sandwiches, so I went in to check out the menu. They featured your classic sub varieties, offered in a medium or large size for about $9. I went ahead and got the big one, and I was not let down. If you can imagine a 10-inch fat hoagie filled with what seemed like a pound of meat and cheese on it, there was more meat than bread. I only ate half of it and saved the rest for later, lest I explode. I rode a trail made of dirt and wood chips that was also shared by pedestrians. After much confusion, I saw a sign that read, "The John Hines Wildlife Refuge." That explained the natureiness of the place. I was led into the middle of a man-made lake, and the trail gradually got skinnier and skinnier. About a half mile in, I was left with a path not much wider than my tire and physically riding through bushes. It felt like the jungle as I got whacked in the face with branches Ace Ventura style. On the other side of the lake, I got spit onto a street that led all the way to downtown Philadelphia, 7 straight miles into the heart of the city. My friend Chris got me a place to stay with his homie Paulie. They were both from Philly and grew up skating together. Paulie worked in IT at a sports stadium and had the East Coast accent you would expect from a native Philadelphian. He lived in a quaint brick townhome on a one-way street that had a bodega on the corner. He asked what I wanted to do, and all I had on my mind was cheesesteak. His girlfriend met up with us, and then they took me to this original joint called Jim's. It was cash only and had signed celebrity pictures covering every inch of the walls. The interior had classic black and white floor tiles and neon signs. We waited in line for 30 minutes as I soaked in the whole experience. It felt exciting to be back in Philly, and I was stoked that Paulie was nice enough to let me hang. I had my sights set on New York, but I decided to take it easy and stop in Princeton, New Jersey. I followed US 13 out of the city and rode on wooded back roads across the border. New Jersey immediately felt different than Philly. The vibes changed for the better and felt like a completely new world. People weren't staring at me with cold contempt, but waving and smiling. I got to Princeton before 4 p.m. and saw a sign stating that the city was established in the 1600s. My host home for the night was a kind woman named Crystal. She was a local journalist who ran her own news outlet. She stayed in a big 5-bedroom house and switched between hosting travelers and renting it short-term to international students at the university. I enjoyed visiting with Crystal. We talked about the state of the news and our views on everything. News is a challenging workplace, and it's difficult to find ways to find a fair wage in it. These days, stations and newspapers are all owned by corporations who want profits more than quality research. Not to mention the cost and bombardment of 24/7 news television stations. Talking to Crystal gave me this refreshing outlook on conversation and interacting with others. We were able to have a sustained conversation without trying to convince each other we are right, even when we had differing views and opinions. Growing up in the church, I felt like everything was an argument about what was most true. I'm learning on this trip what it means to have intelligent conversations that don't have to be fierce when you disagree. I can take statements in stride and present the facts as I currently know them, while checking the facts people give me as equally important information. The more I interact with strangers, I realize how vital listening and engaging with curiosity is. This mindset benefits my growth and maturity substantially more than how well I can interpret a religious book. I've been on a long journey of figuring out my worldview. This trip has helped me realize I love stories and learning from others' experiences, trying to treat everyone as if I'm an apprentice and continuously refining my skills from what they teach me. I'm not saying I am great at this, but at least I have a goal to strive towards. The process of learning emotional maturity is complicated, but continues to help me discover who I am. I had yet to determine how to get into New York City, but Crystal helped me make a game plan. I got out of bed early, and Crystal was already up with a cup of coffee waiting for me. We talked for 30 minutes and took a picture together on our porch before I left. I had to make 30 miles to the Jersey shore and catch a ferry toward Manhattan at 12:30. Maps took me through fancy wooded neighborhoods on small, narrow back roads. There was hardly any traffic, which made everything easier. It was slightly chilly underneath a canopy of trees almost the entire morning. Eventually, I grabbed the Henry Hudson Trail It was a separated path that supposedly went direct to the docks. Even though bike trails are safer, they are notorious for taking you out of the way and being in terrible riding condition. This particular path had tree roots growing underneath the asphalt and was very bumpy. My taint and palms did not enjoy the experience. There was a community of joggers and families out on the trail. I enjoyed waving and smiling at anyone who gave me the light of day. I made it near the water and found the area bustling with activity, people taking boats out and small local shops. Suddenly, the trail ended due to construction. I was blocked. I rerouted around it, but ended up climbing a mountain of a hill on a street of cliff view mansions. I hastily crawled my way up the narrow and winding behemoth. It was soul-crushing to climb with the knowledge I was so close to the flat waterfront. I was soon encouraged by a passing jogger who smiled and gave me a thumbs up. I finally made it out of the crippling elevation and onto a main thoroughfare. It seemed like the whole town was out to get on the water, and I got stuck in brunch traffic. I weaved between tour buses and Ferraris as I attempted to find the dock where my Manhattan-bound ferry would depart. I arrived at the ferry waiting room with 30 minutes to spare. It felt nice not to be constrained by time. Now all I had to do was sit quietly and observe the seemingly affluent New York and New Jersey residents. Everyone in the room was beautiful and seemed straight out of an episode of Jersey Shore. I listened to their conversations about investing, insurance policies, fashion, and deceitful relationships. It was weird witnessing a stereotype confirmed in front of my eyes. I also could have been entirely wrong, and these were all middle-class citizens taking a tug to Manhattan for a late lunch. I felt very out of place and was self-conscious about how people might have viewed my appearance. I was the only person with a beard and had my entire life strapped to a bicycle. I don't usually care about people's opinions of me, but I kind of felt like I was ruining their quiet Sunday afternoon with my presence. I didn't know how to make small talk, so I just stayed quiet awkwardly in the corner. Wealth and affluence make me uncomfortable in general, probably due to my strong opinions about our economy not benefiting the working class. My ferry finally arrived, and I got in line to load my bike. Out of nowhere, a couple of old scraggly guys with bicycles showed up, and we walked our bikes together out to the front of the boat in the open air. During the ride, one of the guys grabbed me to check out the top deck and give me a tour of the city. We sat in the open-air benches while the wind tunnel of the Hudson River tried to blow us out of them. The view was amazing. He pointed out buildings and bridges while proceeding to give me history and facts about each one. He said he owned a boat and was planning a 3-month voyage across the ocean. A couple of young women saw my website written on my vest and asked what I was doing. They had just finished a bike tour and were gearing up to start again in Europe. They supported an organization called Earth Practice, and they raised awareness about sustainable farming and organics. They were curious and easy to talk to. Good people. After the weird vibes of sitting in that waiting room, meeting these cyclists was totally what I needed. It felt like a warm welcome into the melting pot of America. I was bummed we had to part ways, but this is the way of a nomad. You meet incredible people, allow the experience to fill you, and let them blow away in the wind. I had no clue what being in New York for 3 days would be like. I was excited and ready for whatever people and experiences I might find in this magical place. The ferry scooted into the lower Manhattan harbor, and I was in New York City. What an incredible feeling to be there with my bike, arriving on a boat. It felt symbolic arriving on a boat, pondering the history of immigration in the city. America's hub of diversity lies right here at the center. A profound experience indeed. It was a short-lived moment of thought, as life kept moving and I stared into a sea of faces and bodies. I needed to make moves. I checked the map and knew my first stop would be Times Square. I'd never been there before and decided it was the most challenging place I could attempt to ride a bicycle to in New York. I headed northwest toward Midtown and started a Facebook live stream to share this experience with my friends. I weaved between taxis and trucks, hit bike lanes and crossed into left turn lanes. I hadn't had lunch and stopped by a hot dog stand for a quick bite. Full tourist mode. I got lost and had to detour a maze of one-way streets around the Puerto Rico Festival parade route. I didn't mind too much because I was here to explore the city. I finally got into Times Square and it was nuts. Complete sensory overload with all the screens, lights, and thousands of people. You could hardly walk without stopping every 5 feet. I got my souvenir photo and was ready to get out quickly. On my first night in the city, I stayed at my friend Joey's apartment in Brooklyn. He was already on his way to meet me at Times Square. Joey is a fellow skater from Kansas City, and we are also both filmmakers. After finishing his bachelor's in film, he secured a job video editing in New York. He was now living the dream. $1,000 a month to live in the closet of a second-floor apartment in Brooklyn. Joey is one of the nicest people I know, and I hadn't seen him in a few years. It took him an hour to arrive at Times Square, but it was joyous to see his face. I suggested he come out to meet me so we could explore our way back to his place. He brought his skateboard and camera to get footage of me riding through the city. We headed to the Williamsburg Bridge to cross the river, and it was remarkable. On the top level was a biking and pedestrian path. Underneath that were the subway tracks, and then car lanes on each outer side. It's something else to ride a bike 15 stories in the air. It felt a lot safer than the bridge in Baton Rouge. Every bridge in New York is an impressive feat of architecture. We gained speed bombing down the bridge and straight to Joey's apartment a couple miles away. He lived on the second story of a narrow duplex with the skinniest stairs I'd ever seen. We brought my bike inside and had to block his stairs on the left to leave room for the downstairs tenant. It was comical to look at. His bathroom was so small that you basically hit your shins on the toilet immediately upon opening the door. It was the classic New York apartment. We also visited Joey's work office for a wonderful 23rd story view of Manhattan. The next day, I moved to my friend Ethan's apartment, less than a mile from Joey. I know Ethan from a friend group that I rolled with back in my 2011-2012 era. He became a successful architect in New York, and I hadn't seen him in years. I was stoked that he was willing to meet up and let me stay at his place. He lived on the third story of a comfortable complex with wider stairs, tall ceilings, and massive doors. The tricky part was getting my bike to the top floor. I had to completely unload all my bags and carry my bike up. After 3 trips to the top, I found Ethan pressing coffee and cooking breakfast for us. I was humbled by his kindness and appreciated the hospitality. We intentionally left our itinerary open so that the day might unfold naturally. We decided to check out Midtown and took the subway into the city. I was ecstatic to take public transit. We emerged from the depths of the underground tunnels and found ourselves right in the city's heart at Penn Station. We walked around and he gave me an architectural tour of every large building we encountered. He would explain who built it and why it was or was not a good design. He interpreted the way angles and different materials were used. Designing buildings is an art and poetic. He convinced me by the end of the day to be aware of the trash being built in mass quantities and to appreciate well thought out, beautiful, practical, and efficient designs. It made me think about what I might find important if I ever built a house. We ended up at the NYC MoMA. Ethan would point out famous artists' timeless paintings, and most of the time, I had no clue what he was talking about. I'm not a huge art freak, but I can appreciate it. This trip was all about experiencing new things, right? A handful of Picassos were hanging, so that was special. Ethan started a running joke about how I gained street cred every time I witnessed a famous art piece in the museum. We joked there should be an app that gives you pretentious points by viewing great works of art. Ethan introduced me to pocket parks built between buildings. The city transformed vacant spaces into parks with cafes, terraces, tables, and in one case, a waterfall. They are beautiful spaces that feel secluded from the city and act as a bit of escape to enjoy a coffee or a conversation. I told Ethan I wanted to see the Arch, which I was ignorantly referring to Washington Park Square. The park features a sizable ornate arch similar to the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. On the way, I asked if I could stop in Grand Central Station. To my surprise, it was very bright and just as magical feeling as in the movies. The main hall was littered with ornate marble pillars and glowing window archways. I tried to get a selfie with Ethan, and it felt like we were going to be run over at any moment by frantic train commuters. We made it to Washington Park Square, and my friend Alex and cousin Tracy met us to walk to dinner. Alex used to be roommates with my friend Josh and Casey. He now sells medical equipment to hospitals and travels all over the East Coast. Tracy is older than me and moved from Denver to New York for work. It was a grand reunion with everyone. We spent a couple of hours catching up and sharing stories over a Japanese fusion meal. We had a lot of fun, and I felt loved by them all. I had a fulfilling time in the Big Apple and felt like I experienced the city adequately. The following day, I packed out and hugged Ethan goodbye. I thanked him for showing me such a great time in the city and being willing to go with the flow. New York had a profound impact on me. I continued to visit for years after my ride and even spent 3 weeks there in 2021. I enjoyed the pace and layout of the city. Maybe someday fate will bring me there. I set off towards Connecticut. I headed out of Brooklyn and back onto the Williamsburg Bridge to cross into Manhattan and head north. I hit the morning bicycle commuter traffic, which made me smile. It felt much less stressful than car traffic. All the cyclists seemed to be in the zone, ready to get to work on time. As I was riding towards the bridge, I met Danny. My touring bike prompted him to ask about my story. He explained that he had ridden cross-country the year before alone and agreed how hard it is to do something like this by yourself. He was a video editor by trade for a marketing company, so we also had that in common. He snapped a picture of my website and I asked him to email me. It was great meeting another person with similar interests. I came across the ferry terminal that leads to the Statue of Liberty. I had a couple of hours to spare for a quick side adventure, but the price of free was also enticing. When you board the ferry with a bike and bags, they have to check you out with police dogs. An officer came over and sparked a conversation about my trip. He was excited to hear my stories and seemed easygoing. I appreciated the lack of intimidation. The waiting area had a massive map with every bike route in the city. I was enthralled by it as I studied intently. When I boarded the ferry, I found a wide area with a bike rack. I love how thoughtful New York is. Almost no one was on the ferry, so I spent those 20 minutes enjoying the open water air and basking in my decision to try something different. I saw the Statue of Liberty in the distance and wondered why we weren't going towards it. I realized I had taken a ferry to Staten Island instead of Ellis Island. I knocked myself for being so dumb, but there wasn't much I could do about it now. At least I got to see old Lady Liberty from a distance. I made it to Staten Island and waited for the ferry to return to New York. I repeated the motions and found my way to the dog-sniffing station. The guy at this station was even more stoked than the first officer I met. He told me that he used to be a beat cop and recounted busting trafficking operations in the 80s. He was also an avid cyclist and said his retirement goal was to plan an epic trip like mine. I love hearing about people's ambitions. Ambition is how I live my life. I save my money, plan a trip, and then do it. Once I returned to Manhattan, I grabbed the Hudson Greenway from Lower Chelsea up to 220th Street, past Yankee Stadium, and towards the Bronx. I saw several impressive public parks and even a naval shipyard. Going through the Bronx was a vastly different experience from the rest of the city. It felt like I was back in Guatemala. People were walking all over the streets, and neither cars nor pedestrians had any regard for each other's right-of-way. It was a total free-for-all, and I was caught up in the middle of the chaos. I was able to navigate the treacherous streets unscathed as I found the bridge that brought me north into Connecticut. I was relieved to be out of the insanity finally. It was 1 p.m. and I needed some fuel. I stopped in a Wendy's and filled up on dollar menu items. As soon as I sat down, a guy in the booth behind me asked me what I was doing. I told him that I had just ridden my bike across America, and he let out a joyous laugh. He yelled at another lady across the restaurant who had been guessing with him what my deal was. I introduced myself and started a pleasant conversation with Terry. He had a distinct accent and was gregarious in the most positive way. He was born in London, then adopted to the Bronx. He never left. He owned a tricked-out Hummer and said he worked 2 jobs to keep his life nice. He understood we were both hard-working kids just trying to live our best lives. I wasn't sure what to expect when going into New York, but this place changed me. Being a kid from the Midwest who's never really experienced big city life, this was a cultural shift. I heard a different language on every block and saw styles of clothing that you would never see in Kansas City. The diversity of people in the city was very eye-opening to me, and now I realize why it's the most diverse place on the planet. One of Joey's friends told me that New York and Montreal would be the only 2 cultural cities I would visit on my trip, and that I should appreciate that. I felt put off by that statement, like I'd never experienced culture before, but what he was alluding to was an origin story. There is a history and cultural importance that cannot be paralleled by other metropolitan areas due to the melting pot of people groups that coincide in this place. I will be pondering this idea for a long time to come. It is truly a breath of fresh air to get out of the homogeny of the Midwest cities. I would enjoy living here for the diversity alone. The more people I meet and different kinds of people, the more I realize we are all same in a way. We just want to provide for ourselves and our families and try to create a safe place to live. It was nice to share so many reunions with my friends and to know I had so much support. I felt very loved to have a little community in the big city. Having a couple days off was quite pleasant. Seeing all the bike infrastructure and public transit was a drastic change to any place I've ever visited or lived. I felt like I was in heaven riding on 2-lane bicycle highways and protected bike lanes. It gave me a new perspective of what's possible and how vehicles and pedestrians can coexist. The advent of motor vehicles really fucked up the last 80 years of city planning until this most recent decade. Now that I'm halfway up the East Coast, I felt like I was living in luxury, eating at restaurants every day and sleeping indoors. I was ready to take it easy and soak in everything the Eastern Seaboard was willing to throw my way, hoping for good vibes.